In March 2012, the body of 38-year-old Daniel Roth, a beloved bagel shop owner, was discovered in the back room of his shop, Daniel's Bagels, in Manhattan, New York. An investigation uncovered a tangled web of jealousy, betrayal, and obsession. In late 2011, Daniel began a relationship with Sophie LeBlanc, a 26-year-old fashion student, while his ex-wife, Miriam Roth, still harbored bitterness from their tumultuous divorce years earlier. A series of escalating events would ultimately lead to his shocking and brutal murder, unraveling the secrets of those closest to him. It was a chilly evening in early March, the kind that still carried the bite of winter, despite hints of spring in the air. At 8:14 p.m., the quiet hum of Manhattan's East Village was shattered by a frantic 911 call. A young employee, Aaron Mills, had discovered the body of his boss, Daniel Roth, in the back room of Daniel's Bagels. What had started as a routine close-up shift turned into a nightmare he would never forget. When NYPD officers arrived at the scene, the air inside the shop was thick with the metallic tang of blood. The usually bustling bagel shop, known for its warm cinnamon aroma and cheery morning crowds, now felt oppressively still. In the back room, under harsh fluorescent lights, lay the lifeless body of Daniel Roth, a man who had become a neighborhood icon for his charm and entrepreneurial spirit. Daniel's body was sprawled on the floor, his white shirt stained deep red. A single stab wound to his chest told the story of a violent, deliberate attack. Blood spatter streaked across the walls and floor, evidence of a struggle that had likely been brief but intense. Near his outstretched hand was a kitchen knife, its wooden handle slick with blood, discarded as though the killer had dropped it in haste. But what drew immediate attention was the handwritten note clenched tightly in Daniel's other hand. The jagged edges of the torn paper and the hurried scrawl of the message, "You took everything from me," suggested raw emotion, a motive steeped in rage or despair. Detective Rebecca Price was the first investigator to enter the scene. Known for her keen eye and unwavering focus, Rebecca quickly began surveying the room, taking in every detail. The positioning of the body, the proximity of the weapon, the crumpled paper, all of it painted a picture of a deeply personal crime. Her partner, Detective Alan Monroe, followed closely behind, his demeanor more cautious but equally sharp. Together, they began their work, speaking to the officers on site and ensuring the area was sealed off from the growing crowd outside. By 10 p.m., Rebecca and Alan had pieced together the immediate timeline of events. Aaron Mills had been cleaning the front of the shop when he realized Daniel had been gone for over an hour. Concerned, he went to the back room to check on him and found the door slightly ajar. That was when he saw the body. Aaron had stumbled back, horrified, before calling 911. Beyond this, Aaron's knowledge was limited, but his genuine shock and trembling hands suggested he was as much a victim of this tragedy as anyone else. 2 days later, Rebecca and Alan began their formal interviews. The bagel shop employees were their first focus. Carla Brown, the shop's manager, had worked with Daniel since its inception. She described him as ambitious and kind, a man who treated his staff like family. But when the conversation shifted to his personal life, Carla hesitated before revealing a significant detail. Daniel had recently started dating Sophie LeBlanc, a young fashion student. Carla didn't know much about Sophie, but mentioned she had seen them together at the shop several times. Daniel had seemed happier lately, but Carla admitted there was tension between him and Sophie that she couldn't quite pinpoint. Next, the detectives turned their attention to the broader circle of customers and nearby shop owners. One witness, a florist named Claire Henderson, reported seeing a woman loitering near the shop on the night of the murder. Claire remembered the woman distinctly because she appeared agitated, pacing back and forth, and frequently glancing toward the bagel shop's entrance. When pressed for a description, Claire mentioned the woman's elegant coat and striking features, details that matched Miriam Roth, Daniel's ex-wife. Miriam was a name that carried weight in Daniel's story. The two had been married for over a decade, during which they built the bagel shop together. However, the marriage had unraveled 5 years earlier amidst allegations of infidelity. Miriam had fought fiercely during the divorce, particularly for her share of the shop, but ultimately lost significant financial ground. Their split left her deeply embittered, a fact well known among their mutual acquaintances. At 4 p.m. on March 8th, Rebecca and Alan arrived at Miriam's Upper West Side apartment. The building was quiet, its pre-war charm masking the turmoil that lay within one of its units. Miriam greeted them at the door, her expression calm, but her body language tense. She invited them into her tastefully decorated living room, where every object seemed carefully curated. The setting was serene, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. When questioned about her whereabouts on the night of the murder, Miriam claimed she had been home alone, reading and going to bed early. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed, but Rebecca noticed subtle cracks in her demeanor. Miriam's hand rested on the armrest of her chair, her fingers drumming lightly, a sign of agitation she seemed unaware of. She admitted to having no recent contact with Daniel, dismissing any suggestion that she might harbor ill will toward him. Yet, the detectives could sense that the mention of Sophie unsettled her. Miriam's expression tightened when Alan casually referred to Sophie as Daniel's girlfriend, as if the title carried a weight she wasn't prepared to confront. Rebecca and Alan left Miriam's apartment with more questions than answers. Miriam's polished exterior didn't entirely mask her bitterness, and her proximity to the shop on the night of the murder placed her firmly in their sights. However, her calm confidence suggested that if she was involved, she believed she had left no trail. For the detectives, this marked only the beginning of unraveling a case that seemed to grow darker with every turn. Before the tragedy that turned Daniel's Bagels into a crime scene, Daniel Roth and Miriam Roth were the quintessential power couple in their neighborhood. They had met in 1995, when Daniel was a 21-year-old culinary school dropout with big dreams and little else. Miriam, 4 years older, was a marketing graduate working in a small PR firm. She had an eye for potential, and something about Daniel's charm and unwavering ambition captivated her. Their whirlwind romance quickly turned into marriage by 1997, and soon after, they pooled their modest savings to open a bagel shop. Daniel's Bagels was born out of love and struggle. While Daniel crafted recipes, fine-tuning the dough, and mastering the perfect boil-bake method, Miriam worked tirelessly on branding. It was she who chose the catchy name, designed the logo, and managed the finances. In those early days, they worked side by side, often pulling 16-hour shifts to keep the shop afloat. Their sacrifices paid off, and within a few years, the shop became a staple in the East Village, praised for its unique bagel flavors and cozy atmosphere. But as the business flourished, cracks began to form in their partnership. By the 2005, Daniel had become the face of the brand, basking in the community's admiration, while Miriam toiled behind the scenes. She didn't mind at first. She believed in their shared vision. But over time, Daniel's ego grew, and he began to dismiss her contributions. Locals saw only him, the charming baker, while Miriam faded into the background. Resentment crept into their marriage like a slow poison. The final blow came in 2007, when Miriam discovered that Daniel had been unfaithful. The betrayal shattered her. She had sacrificed so much, her career, her time, and her dreams, for their shared success. To discover that Daniel had been seeking attention elsewhere felt like the ultimate betrayal. Miriam confronted him, but instead of salvaging their relationship, the fight spiraled into bitterness. Daniel refused to let her pain tarnish his public image. Within months, the divorce papers were filed. The divorce, finalized in 2008, was brutal. Miriam fought hard for her share of the business but ultimately lost half her stake due to a prenuptial agreement she had signed in their early days. The financial blow left her struggling to maintain the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, while Daniel continued to thrive. Friends later recalled Miriam's deep bitterness. She often spoke of how Daniel had stolen her life and owed her everything. For Miriam, the years that followed were bleak. She bounced between freelance marketing gigs and temporary contracts, struggling to regain her footing. Meanwhile, she watched Daniel's life flourish from afar. His success, a constant reminder of what she had lost. 4 years after the divorce, Daniel Roth's life had taken yet another turn. In late 2011, he met Sophie LeBlanc, a 26-year-old fashion student originally from Montreal. Sophie had moved to New York with dreams of breaking into the industry, balancing part-time jobs and night classes to make ends meet. She was drawn to Daniel's confidence and warmth, finding comfort in his mature demeanor and established life. To Daniel, Sophie was a breath of fresh air. Her youth and optimism were a stark contrast to the bitterness that had consumed his previous relationship. Their relationship quickly grew intense. By the January 2012, Sophie had become a fixture at the bagel shop, often seen sitting at a corner table with her sketchbook, waiting for Daniel to finish his shifts. Customers and employees noticed their connection, though some whispered about the significant age gap. For Sophie, Daniel represented stability and charm. For Daniel, Sophie offered him a chance to start anew. But behind their outward happiness, tensions simmered. Daniel confided in Sophie about his lingering fears regarding Miriam. He described her as a deeply wounded woman, recounting moments of anger and resentment during their marriage. Sophie listened, but Daniel's concerns about Miriam seemed distant and almost exaggerated, until they weren't. By the early February 2012, Daniel started receiving anonymous letters at the shop. The notes were vague but threatening, with phrases like, "You'll pay for what you did," scrawled in jagged handwriting. He dismissed them at first, brushing them off as harmless spite. But Sophie grew anxious. She urged him to take the threats seriously, especially after he spotted Miriam near his apartment building one evening. Sophie's worry began to seep into their relationship, creating an undercurrent of unease. On March 10, 2012, Sophie was brought in for questioning by detectives Rebecca Price and Alan Monroe. Her usual composed demeanor had shattered. She was visibly distraught, her hands trembling as she spoke about Daniel. She described their relationship as intense but loving, painting a picture of two people deeply connected, but grappling with external pressures. Sophie revealed how Daniel had expressed growing fear in the weeks leading up to his death. He had mentioned seeing Miriam outside his apartment twice, and each time he said her gaze was cold and unrelenting. Sophie shared her own unease, explaining how the threatening letters had escalated her worries. She admitted to feeling a deep sense of dread, though she had tried to focus on supporting Daniel rather than pressing him to take action. But as the detectives probed further, cracks began to appear in Sophie's narrative. A search of her phone revealed a series of heated text exchanges between her and Daniel. The messages hinted at tension over Miriam, with Sophie accusing Daniel of not fully cutting ties. Sophie appeared to harbor her own insecurities, feeling that Miriam's shadow loomed over their relationship. One message, sent just days before the murder, read, "You need to handle this, Daniel. I won't live like this." Another referenced unfinished business with Miriam, though Sophie insisted the phrase had been taken out of context. Still, the detectives couldn't ignore the intensity of Sophie's emotions or the possibility that her relationship with Daniel was more complicated than it seemed. As Rebecca and Alan wrapped up their questioning, they couldn't shake the feeling that Sophie was withholding something. Her grief seemed genuine, but her defensiveness suggested there was more to the story. For the detectives, Sophie was no longer just a grieving girlfriend. She was a person of interest in a case that was growing more tangled by the day. The investigation took a dramatic turn on March 15, 2012, as critical pieces of evidence began to surface, reshaping the case against Miriam Roth. The forensics team, after days of meticulous work, confirmed the presence of Miriam's fingerprints on the handle of the knife used to kill Daniel Roth. The discovery sent shock waves through the investigation team, solidifying Miriam as the primary suspect. It raised chilling questions. Was this proof of guilt, or was there another layer to the crime that had yet to emerge? While processing this revelation, Detective Alan Monroe uncovered another troubling detail in Miriam's financial records. Just a week before the murder, on March 1, 2012, Miriam had withdrawn a significant amount of cash, more than $20,000, from her savings. The purpose of this withdrawal remained unclear, but it painted a picture of someone who was possibly planning something drastic. Combined with her bitter history with Daniel, the withdrawal seemed to strengthen the theory that Miriam had been consumed by rage and jealousy, leading her to seek retribution. Adding to the mounting evidence was surveillance footage from a nearby deli. The grainy black and white video, time-stamped March 6, 2012, at 8:02 p.m., showed a woman resembling Miriam walking briskly toward Daniel's bagel shop. The woman's posture and movements matched Miriam's profile, and her proximity to the time of Daniel's death raised further suspicion. While the footage wasn't crystal clear, it was enough to suggest that Miriam was in the vicinity when the crime occurred. As the detectives dug deeper, Alan stumbled upon another piece of damning evidence: Miriam's therapy records. The notes, obtained legally through a court order, provided a window into her mental state in the months leading up to the murder. The records revealed troubling admissions about her feelings toward Daniel and his new girlfriend, Sophie LeBlanc. Miriam had expressed feelings of uncontrollable rage during sessions, describing how she felt humiliated by Daniel's betrayal and Sophie's presence in his life. These sessions, though confidential, painted Miriam as a deeply tormented woman who was struggling to control her emotions. Despite the overwhelming evidence against Miriam, March 20th, 2012, brought a shocking twist that threw the investigation into turmoil. Detective Rebecca Price, while reviewing Daniel's personal belongings, made a startling discovery. Among his effects was his smartphone, which had gone largely unnoticed until now. On the device, Rebecca found a series of unsent text drafts, likely written by Daniel in the days leading up to his death. The drafts revealed a side of Daniel that no one had suspected. In one text, he expressed plans to end his relationship with Sophie, describing her behavior as increasingly intense and possessive. He wrote about feeling suffocated and mentioned concerns about her erratic moods. The text hinted that Daniel had begun to fear Sophie, though he had stopped short of confronting her directly. These revelations painted Sophie in a new and unsettling light. As Rebecca and Alan pursued this lead, they interviewed Sophie's roommate, Emily Chambers, who had been reluctant to talk earlier in the investigation. Emily, now visibly shaken, shared disturbing stories about Sophie's behavior. She described Sophie as passionate but unpredictable, prone to outbursts of jealousy, especially when it came to Daniel. Emily recounted a particularly alarming incident just weeks before the murder. Sophie had confronted Miriam outside the bagel shop, screaming that Miriam would never have him back. The altercation had escalated until a passerby intervened. This revelation added complexity to the case, raising the possibility that Sophie's intense emotions could have driven her to act impulsively. But just as the pieces seemed to align against Sophie, Miriam's lawyer delivered a bombshell defense. Surveillance footage from her apartment building, time-stamped March 6, 2012, at 8:20 p.m., showed Miriam entering her lobby and heading to her unit. The timing directly contradicted the deli footage and the theory that she was near the bagel shop when Daniel was killed. Miriam's alibi, bolstered by this evidence, cast significant doubt on her involvement. This new development left the detectives reeling. The evidence against Miriam, the fingerprints, the therapy records, and the withdrawn money was compelling but now conflicted with a solid alibi. Sophie's volatile behavior and Daniel's unsent texts added another layer of complexity, suggesting she might have had a motive and opportunity. The case, which had seemed straightforward, now spiraled into a tangled web of conflicting narratives and hidden truths. Rebecca and Alan faced a daunting task, unraveling the truth behind a murder driven by obsession, jealousy, and betrayal. Each new piece of evidence blurred the lines between guilt and innocence, making it clear that the truth was far more complicated than it initially seemed. As they pressed forward, the detectives couldn't shake the feeling that the real story had yet to fully reveal itself. The culmination of weeks of relentless investigation came to a dramatic head on March 25, 2012. Detective Rebecca Price, plagued by inconsistencies in the evidence, spent countless hours reviewing every detail of the case. The breakthrough came when she revisited Sophie LeBlanc's phone records. Among them was a previously overlooked message time-stamped just hours before Daniel Roth's death. The text was sent to Emily Chambers, Sophie's roommate, and it hinted at a plan to set things straight with Daniel and end the distractions. This message, coupled with Sophie's erratic behavior and her documented confrontation with Miriam, pushed Rebecca to reevaluate the sequence of events. As she pieced the clues together, a horrifying realization emerged. Sophie had not only killed Daniel in a fit of rage, but had meticulously orchestrated the crime to frame Miriam. The final piece of the puzzle came from forensic analysis. It revealed that the fingerprints on the murder weapon, previously thought to belong solely to Miriam, had trace smudges inconsistent with her grip. This suggested tampering, a deliberate effort to make it appear as though Miriam had wielded the knife. Rebecca recalled Miriam's account of her earlier argument with Sophie, where physical contact had occurred. This, she concluded, was when Sophie had secretly collected Miriam's prints, carefully plotting her plan well before the murder. With this new perspective, Rebecca reconstructed the events of the March 6, 2012. Sophie had lured Daniel to the back room of the shop under the guise of a romantic gesture. She had prepared the setting to appear intimate, lighting candles and setting up a small meal. But the mood quickly soured when Sophie confronted Daniel about his intentions to break up with her. The argument escalated, emotions running high. In a moment of blind rage, Sophie grabbed the nearest object, a kitchen knife, and stabbed Daniel in the chest. The aftermath was cold and calculated. Sophie planted the incriminating note in Daniel's hand, a detail meant to point suspicion directly at Miriam. She wiped the knife carefully, leaving only Miriam's fingerprints, and discarded it near Daniel's body. By the time she left the scene, Sophie had crafted a narrative that would implicate her lover's ex-wife, ensuring that the spotlight would be far from herself. Rebecca, armed with this understanding, confronted Sophie at her apartment. The arrest unfolded quietly, without the chaos typical of such moments. Sophie, realizing the web of lies was unraveling, offered no resistance. The detectives led her out of the building in handcuffs, the weight of her actions evident in her tear-streaked face. Onlookers, neighbors, who had known Sophie as a friendly and ambitious young woman, watched in stunned silence as the truth about her spiraled life came to light. The trial of Sophie LeBlanc began in June 2013, drawing national attention. The once quiet story of a local bagel shop murder had become a sensational case of obsession and betrayal. The courtroom was packed with reporters, locals, and those curious about the woman who had gone to such lengths to conceal her crime. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Karen Lowe, presented a chilling narrative. Sophie's text messages, detailing her growing jealousy and fear of losing Daniel, became key evidence. One message to her roommate Emily, recorded on the day of the murder, included an ominous confession. She felt cornered, by Daniel's apparent disinterest and Miriam's lingering presence in his life. The prosecution also played an audio recording from Emily's phone, where Sophie, in a moment of emotional breakdown, admitted to wanting Miriam out of the way. Miriam Roth, once a suspect herself, took the stand in a pivotal moment of the trial. She recounted the toll Sophie's actions had taken on her life, describing how she had been vilified, her past mistakes magnified, and her reputation tarnished. Her testimony was raw and emotional, a stark reminder of the collateral damage caused by Sophie's crime. As she spoke, the courtroom hung on her every word, the pain in her voice cutting through the silence. The defense attempted to paint Sophie as a troubled young woman, overwhelmed by her emotions and acting impulsively. But the evidence of premeditation, particularly the careful planting of Miriam's fingerprints, left little room for doubt. Sophie's actions had been deliberate, driven by jealousy and a desire to control a situation slipping away from her. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 2 hours. They returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Sophie was sentenced to 25 years to life, a punishment that reflected the gravity of her actions. As the verdict was read, Sophie remained stoic, though her eyes betrayed the enormity of what she had lost. In the months following the trial, Daniel's Bagels was sold to new owners. The once thriving shop, a cornerstone of the community, became a bittersweet memory for those who had known Daniel. Regular customers mourned not only his loss, but also the shadow the crime had cast over a place that had once symbolized warmth and connection. Miriam Roth, though vindicated, found little solace in the outcome. The years of bitterness and the trauma of being wrongfully accused left scars she would carry forever. She sold her apartment and left New York, seeking a fresh start, far from the city that held so many painful memories. Friends said she moved to a quiet town in upstate New York, where she lived a simpler life, focusing on healing. For Detective Rebecca Price, the case lingered as a grim reminder of how jealousy and obsession could unravel lives. She often reflected on the choices and emotions that had led to such a tragedy. The framed photo of Daniel, still hanging in the shop's back room when it was sold, remained a haunting image in her mind. A man full of promise, tragically cut short. The final chapter of this story closed, but the echoes of Daniel's life and the chaos surrounding his death remained, a cautionary tale of how love, betrayal, and obsession can collide in the most unexpected and devastating ways. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on our daily updates. And check out another chilling case we've covered: the story of a state trooper who murdered his female co-worker to hide their affair. Don't forget to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below.